This is Andy Abeld, Primary Media Examiner for the ACIO. I'm in possession of a body that will allow me to complete the anime autopsy and investigation of subject My Home Hero. Type notes will serve as my official report. Preliminary findings include spoilers, battery, mentioning of DV, and homicide. Any media examiner unable to complete this investigation due to these preliminary findings may exit this report without consequence. A body was discovered. My office believes it's the body of the head of a local gang who has been missing for a few months. His name was Yoshitatsu Matori. He was 47 years old. My office believes that the body was unearthed due to the large typhoon that recently hit the island. While his line of work was dangerous and could lead to a shortened lifespan, being a major player in the criminal underworld, I take the position, unlike some of my colleagues, that he and others like him who find themselves on my table as part of my investigations are still victims and human beings. And human beings deserve dignity in life and in death. That being said, this will be treated like any other anime autopsy I've conducted. His next of kin is his son, Nobuto Matori, who has been missing for at least a year. In the absence of any other known family members, my office has notified Yoshitatsu Matori's ex-wife of his discovery. Okay, on to you, Mr. Matori. From what I can see here, you've been decomposing for many months. Please forgive my intrusion now, so I can provide you some dignity later, okay? So, first off, I see multiple spots of discoloration to the face, a sign of bruising. You fought very hard, didn't you? I see a few missing teeth, not uncommon to find because of decomposition, but considering the amount of time Mr. Matori's been decomposing, and the fact that these missing teeth seem to correspond to the areas of bruising I just mentioned, I suspect this is in relation to whatever fight you ended up putting up against your attacker. The wound that likely led to Mr. Yoshitatsu's death is a stab wound to the mid-portion of the torso, likely puncturing the large intestine. A slow and agonizing death for sure. Now, if it were for the presence of defensive wounds, many defensive wounds might I add, I would be inclined to mention seppuku, and therefore suicide is a possible method of death, as I'm certain, Mr. Matori, correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably did some things in your life for which you would want to atone. Still, I am leaning towards homicide. I mean, his body was dumped by someone for some reason. Based on CCTV, Yoshitatsu Matori was last seen exiting a vehicle in the vicinity of where his son, Nobuto Matori's ex-girlfriend, Reika Tosu, resides. The neighbors of Miss Reika report that they heard a fight taking place around the time I believe Yoshitatsu Matori was in the area. Police were called to Miss Reika Tosu's apartment due to a noise complaint, and according to responding officers' notes, a suspected male voice responded to the officers' inquiries, though he did not open the door. This disembodied man's voice claimed to be chasing his daughter's escaped hamster. Now, it's a few weeks prior to this incident that I believe the events leading to Mr. Matori's death were set into motion, beginning with Reika Tosu, spotted eating lunch with her father, Tetsuo Tosu. According to nearby witnesses, Miss Reika appeared to have heavy bruising on her face. When her father, Mr. Tetsuo, questioned his daughter about the bruising, she abruptly left the diner. It's likely, based on Reika's boyfriend, again, Nobuto Matori's track record, that Nobuto was responsible for the bruising. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Tosu was spotted following Nobuto Matori. Witnesses reported seeing Mr. Tosu accosted by someone associated with Nobuto Matori, accusing Mr. Tosu of following the young man. Witnesses then report seeing Mr. Tosu dragged to a nearby alleyway as he pleaded for help. No one answered his pleas, as witnesses believed the situation was gang-related, and so they didn't want to get involved. Of course, they were correct with this assumption. He was likely assaulted in the alleyway, though I cannot say with any level of certainty. Blackmail may have also been involved, a common tactic used by this particular gang. Mr. Tosu's boss reported that Tetsuo Tosu called off work that day, as Mr. Tosu claimed he sustained an injury. Eyewitnesses state that they recalled seeing someone who matched the description of Tetsuo Tosu enter Reika Tosu's apartment. In Mr. Tosu's statement, he claimed that he entered his daughter's apartment for the purposes of cleaning the apartment as a gift to Miss Reika. Both his daughter and his wife, Kasen Tosu, confirmed this to be the case. Perhaps he conducted some intensive cleaning, as neighbors reported hearing loud thuds coming from Reika Tosu's apartment all day long. Reika Tosu's neighbors also reported seeing Nobuto Matori enter Miss Tosu's apartment home, but they did not see what time he left. Tetsuo Tosu reported that Nobuto Matori stopped by Reika's apartment to collect some personal items, and in doing so got into a physical altercation with Mr. Tosu prior to leaving. Mr. Tosu did not know what time Mr. Nobuto left the apartment. Despite the assault, the police were not notified. Perhaps Mr. Tosu knew to some extent that Nobuto Matori was a gang member. This is the last time anyone has seen or heard from Nobuto Matori. This would make Tetsuo Tosu the last known person to see Nobuto Matori. Due to his criminal activity, it's possible that Mr. Nobuto may have used an underground network to flee the country, or he's deceased. It is not known why. But following the disappearance of Nobuto Matori, Tetsuo Tosu and his family were followed by this local gang. It is not clear to me if this gang suspected Mr. Tosu in the disappearance, or if this gang followed the Tosu family due to Miss Reika's relationship with Nobuto Matori. Given Tetsuo Tosu's background as a former playwright and current salesperson, devoted father, and husband, as well as him seemingly being an all-around upstanding individual within the community, the latter is most likely to be the case. Still, I do feel like it's a worthwhile endeavor to entertain possibilities as to why this gang decided to follow this family, following Mr. Tetsuo more prominently. As pure speculation on my behalf, I admit, I can see how a devoted father would want to do everything in his power to protect his daughter from DV. Under this interpretation, the reason why Nobuto Matori went missing is because Mr. Tosu killed him in order to protect his daughter. A crime of passion meeting at the street sign of opportunity. Mr. Tosu did this when he encountered him in Miss Reika's apartment. Further, this may be why he cleaned his daughter's apartment, to remove evidence that a man was murdered in her home. In this scenario, how much the daughter or wife knew is really impossible to gauge. But considering that Kasen Tosu's credit card statements show the purchase of several suspicious items, perhaps Miss Kasen knows more than she's letting on. These items could be combined with an existing large container, like say, a bathtub, to essentially burn off the tissue fat and fluids of a body, making it more compact and easier to transport. Also, Mr. Tosu was a former fictional crime writer. It's possible he knew more complex methods that could be used to dispose of a body, or at least he has a very capable imagination. CCTV does show Mr. Tosu with a suitcase in the vicinity of Miss Reika Tosu's home. The case could contain the remains of Mr. Nobuto, or also clothing items of Miss Reika, since she was staying at her childhood home during this time. He did return to his home with the suitcase in tow. It is likely that, upon hearing about his missing and possibly deceased son, Yoshitatsu Matori, here with me today of course, ordered his underlings to surveil the Tosu family. We also see that, via a gardening and home shop security camera footage, Mr. Tosu's vehicle was broken into by two known gang members, and the contents of the suitcase were revealed. The suitcase contained expected items, like clothing. Suspicious to me, though, are the items that Mr. Tosu purchased himself at this home and garden store. He bought a compost accelerator, potting mix, and an extra large plant pot. A mixture of compost accelerant with the potting mix could cause rapid decomposition of body tissue. Thus, these items could have aided in the disposal of Nobuto Matori's body, but I sincerely cannot argue this with any level of certainty. After all, he did buy vegetable seeds, and according to his daughter, both her mom and her dad were interested in making a home vegetable garden. It is very likely that the Matori gang considered the family as having some involvement in the disappearance of Nobuto Matori, as not only was the family heavily monitored, but they also were potentially bugged by the gang when, based on an anonymous witness report, an apparent gang member talked to the couple while another gang member searched and bugged their home. The witness apparently saw a suspicious individual sneaking out of the family home after the Tosus went back into their house. What happened during the next day is a shocking scene captured by CCTV. It shows that Mr. Tosu was kidnapped by gang members, though, curiously, there were no reports of a kidnapping or anything along those lines. And I have to wonder why no one in the Tosu family contacted the authorities. Are they hiding something themselves? Have they been threatened into silence? Right now, I don't know. But what I do know is that the kidnapping took place around 21:30, as Mr. Tosu was walking home from his daughter's apartment. Lucky for you, Mr. Matori, this office's gang investigation unit has been tracking your little gang for years. And we know about the warehouse your underlings took Mr. Tosu. The warehouse used for the purposes of torturing people. You remember this? You know what I'm saying? Okay, I know you do. A prominent gang member who was involved in the kidnapping of Mr. Tosu is Kyouichi Majima. I suspect he was largely in charge of the kidnapping, given his rank and position within the gang. It's likely that our victim discussed his missing son with Mr. Kyouichi. Neighbors of Mr. and Mrs. Tosu reported seeing people lurking around the Tosu's family home around 21:30, the same time the kidnapping took place. It's highly likely that those were also gang members. They may have attempted to kidnap or intimidate Kasen Tosu. While it's unclear as to why the gang went to these drastic measures, it is apparent that they desired to get some kind of information out of Mr. and Mrs. Tosu. Based on witness reporting, Mr. Tosu was injured, most likely as a result of the torture he endured at the hands of this local gang. What's increasingly surprising is that after this incident, Mr. Tosu appears to have been working alongside Kyouichi Majima. Perhaps he was blackmailed, or perhaps the gang wanted to get some information from him, information that they wouldn't have gotten if they had killed him. Again, it's not clear to me why the dynamic between the gang and the Tosus seemingly shifted. CCTV and witness reports do show Kyouichi Majima and Tetsuo Tosu increasingly together. Kyouichi Majima was spotted outside a shopping complex in Akihabara with Mr. Tosu at around 1900. They were then seen getting into a silver sedan, license plate TO90-01. CCTV then spotted the pair going into a cabaret club together, where they spoke with Miss Hibiki, who is the live-in and long-term girlfriend of Nobuto Matori. Miss Hibiki confirmed meeting Tetsuo Tosu. She recalled that both Mr. Tetsuo and Mr. Kyouichi were asking about Mr. Nobuto. She claimed to reveal to Tetsuo Tosu that Mr. Nobuto had secretly pulled off a heist involving an armored vehicle that the gang planned on doing themselves. She also revealed that if the gang knew this, they would likely punish or even kill Mr. Nobuto. This kind of information makes me want to believe that Tetsuo Tosu probably had nothing to do with Nobuto Matori's disappearance. Mr. Yoshitatsu, do you think this too? Only dead men could talk. It would make my line of work a little bit easier. I'm still gonna figure this out for you, okay? Anyways, Miss Hibiki also stated that she told Tetsuo Tosu about a secret social media account belonging to Mr. Nobuto. I can only imagine that, if Nobuto Matori was killed, an enterprising individual would be interested in knowing about this private account. Perhaps it could be used in some way to fake evidence. Maybe even pretend that Nobuto Matori is still alive, providing that he's even dead in the first place. The same night that Mr. Tosu met Miss Hibiki, gang-related activity was reported. This involved gunfire, a car set ablaze, and a red sedan that somehow dived over the railing of a bridge, landing in the ravine below. A man was found dead near the area where the car was located. He didn't die from any injuries to his body that would be related to a car accident like you would think. He died from a gunshot wound to the head. The gang unit's undercover team reported that a higher-ranking gang member forced both Mr. Majima and Mr. Tosu to participate in a deadly heist involving gang members in an opposing faction, the Okutai. A senior-ranking member of the Matori gang handed the two men a bill at the cabaret club for 10 million yen, a debt that they somehow accrued. He gave the two an option. The debt could have been paid directly using cash or indirectly by participating in the heist. Our unit believes that Kyouichi Majima was shot during the altercation, and it's likely that Tetsuo Tosu was with Mr. Kyouichi when this took place. The undercover team believes that Mr. Majima would have died if it weren't for Mr. Tosu's intervention. Now, to many, this would indicate that Mr. Tosu may be a gang member himself, and would therefore be willing to save a fellow member's life. To be fair, if I had the opportunity to save the life of someone, I would try, regardless of their sordid past. Perhaps that's the stance Mr. Tosu took when he allegedly saved Mr. Majima's life. Mr. Tosu saved this man's life by removing him from a burning vehicle, making it easier to patch up the bullet wound Mr. Majima reportedly sustained. Back to that secret social media account that Miss Hibiki mentioned. The cyber unit is looking closer into this account. Their findings will be added as an addendum to this report whenever those results become available. Though, what they have discovered is pretty interesting. They discovered a comment made by Mr. Nobuto's account on a video where he supposedly appears, which was most likely faked. In the video, only the back of the imposter Nobuto Matori is visible as he walks in the middle of the street. Now, there is no audio, the visual quality is poor, and frankly, there's no reason to believe that Mr. Nobuto would have been spotted by some random person who just happens to be recording for some reason that very moment before ever being spotted by our CCTV citywide surveillance system. It's inconceivable. And based on reports from our gang unit's undercover team, when the video was discovered, the gang also believed the video was fake. Fake video aside, someone using Mr. Nobuto's account replied as if they were Mr. Nobuto himself. Mind you, this is the time where he's believed to have already been missing. Now, who commented and for what purpose? I honestly cannot say. But Follow me here. I think faking such a low-quality video wouldn't be difficult for, say, a former screenwriter, like Mr. Tosu, to be able to do, or at least find someone who can. Perhaps his wife, Kasen Tosu, was in cahoots with her husband regarding the creation and posting of this faked video. The video could have been a ploy to mislead the gang about Mr. Nobuto's whereabouts. Further, according to Miss Hibiki, Mr. Tosu requested to use an old phone of Nobuto Matori. She did not know as to why he made this request, but as her statement says, she did give an old phone of Mr. Nobuto's to Mr. Tosu. Miss Hibiki also stated that it was around this time when she received an email from Mr. Nobuto, stating that he messed up and he needed to disappear for a while. It's quite possible that Mr. Tosu is the one who sent her that email, after getting access to Mr. Nobuto's passwords and accounts. Though it is more probable that Mr. Nobuto needed to disappear due to his criminal activities. Still, considering that Nobuto Matori's father is with me, it's very possible that they met the same fate at the hands of the same perpetrator. In line with my Tosu fake video theory, CCTV did capture Kasen Tosu meeting with an old friend from 20 years prior, Tabata Tatsuji. Kasen was spotted getting into the vehicle of this minor actor at around 14:30. They met at the front of the discount store Don Quijote. Mr. Tabata was interviewed and stated that the Tosus offered him a minor role in a fake documentary they were making. He stated that he wore a wig and he was filmed from behind, walking down the street, while a car drove slowly behind him where the filming was taking place. I believe that Mrs. Tosu was filming him for the purposes of showing that Nobuto Matori was still alive and in the local area. This resulted in what I surmise is the same video that was posted to the social media site, and where the fake Nobuto Matori commented on the post claiming that he was the one in the video. Was Mr. or Mrs. Tosu the one who commented on the video as if one of the two was Mr. Nobuto? If so, how did they get the password to Mr. Nobuto's accounts? Perhaps Mr. Tosu found the password from other gang members or from anyone he encountered while searching for information about Mr. Nobuto. I don't know. What I do know is that, based on CCTV and witness statements, Mr. Tosu inquired about Nobuto Matori at a local bar that Mr. Nobuto was known to frequent. He even happened to meet our victim, Yoshitatsu Matori, which is quite the coincidence if you ask me. According to the bartender, Mr. Yoshitatsu was distraught at the fact that his son was missing. Yoshitatsu was asking about Nobuto's whereabouts. According to the same bartender, he overheard the conversation between Mr. Matori and Mr. Tosu. The conversation led to Mr. Matori stating that he'd kill anyone and their family if they had a hand in his son's disappearance. Because of course you would say that. Why are you trying to give me so much trouble when I am trying to help you? Could you please keep those thoughts and comments to yourself? You know what? Now, yeah, that's automatic. You are definitely keeping that to yourself now, aren't you? Mr. Matori also noted that when Cap was around, things with his family were better. His son was happier and didn't start showing any behavioral problems until after Cap's passing. After Yoshitatsu Matori left the bar, Mr. Tosu asked the bartender whether he had seen Mr. Nobuto. The bartender said no, but also told Mr. Tosu that he had just met the young man's father, Yoshitatsu Matori. The bartender mentioned to us that he didn't know Mr. Tosu as Tetsuo Tosu. In fact, he said that Mr. Tetsuo claimed to be a man by the name of Tabata Tetsuji. Does that name sound familiar? Because it sure does to me. It was this encounter that I believed to Mr. Tosu obtaining Mr. Nobuto's password. If Mr. Tosu was involved in harming Nobuto Matori, he may have felt as if his life and his family's life were in mortal danger, especially after speaking with Mr. Matori directly. Now, other media examiners may not be convinced of Mr. Tosu's involvement, but I believe the circumstantial evidence is screaming with the alarm bells here. At least he's not as incapable as he may appear to be on the surface. Mr. Matori, are you and I on the same page? Do you see this too? Still not talking? That's okay. Maybe the evidence can speak for you. Through CCTV, it is clear that Kyouichi Majima met with Mr. Tosu. Mr. Kyouichi is seen on his phone looking at his laptop. Our gang investigation unit explains that this was the time when Mr. Majima was notified by the gang that the video was fake. The gang was able to discern that the video was inauthentic based on knowing how Nobuto walked. After this revelation, Mr. Kyouichi returned with Mr. Tosu to the Tosu residence. Neighbors report seeing the two men pour out a pot containing soil in the Tosu's backyard, and Mr. Kyouichi sifted through that soil. Was he looking for evidence of Nobuto's remains? According to the neighbors, the two men were interrupted by Kasen Tosu, and they followed her back into the house. Even though I believe Mr. Majima was looking for bodily remains, I assume nothing was uncovered. Not sure the value of this next bit of information. I'm just adding it to this report. But the neighbors also mentioned that they witnessed Mr. Tosu, quote unquote, taking a dump in his own backyard. Ugh. And it's unfortunate that Miss Reika verified this, explaining that the only bathroom was occupied by a guest, Mr. Majima. She met the guest as he was exiting the restroom. Also, according to Miss Reika, Mr. Majima mentioned that he knew about her missing boyfriend, Nobuto. She reported being angry that her parents disclosed this kind of personal information to a business client. She states that her parents introduced Mr. Majima as a work client, and Kasen Tosu also warned her daughter that he was a womanizer and to stay away from him. Miss Reika also reports that after Mr. Majima and her dad left their home together, she discovered a handwritten note from Mr. Kyouichi instructing her to contact him because he claimed her parents were hiding something from her. Now, Miss Reika has come to believe that Kyouichi Majima was her stalker? We're still trying to verify this claim, but right now, there is no indication that this is the case. Soon after the two men left the Tosu family home, Kasen Tosu was seen on CCTV near the residence of Mr. Majima's family home, where his mother resides. Based on what Mrs. Majima told investigators, Kasen did meet her at her home, telling Mrs. Majima that she would be awarded some kind of prize due to an online purchasing done by her son. Thus, under the guise of awarding Mrs. Majima a prize, Kasen gained access to Mr. Kyouichi's mother's home. Mrs. Majima explained that she spoke with Mrs. Kasen about quote-unquote many things. When pressed for information, she stated that she talked about family life, about how her husband, Kyouichi's father, hanged himself due to pressure from a gang driving him to the brink of destruction, then of how his death led to the Majimas losing their beloved family diner. I can't believe she disclosed this information to a complete stranger upon their first meeting. She stated that Mr. Kyouichi promised her that he would one day reestablish that restaurant. She followed this up by saying Mrs. Kasen left her home without incident. Mrs. Majima also expressed disappointment at having not received her prize. Why Kasen Tosu was at Mrs. Majima's home is unknown, but I suspect she was there to gather information. CCTV did capture Mrs. Tosu carrying a medium-sized gift bag, but she left with the bag and seemingly all its contents in tow. We next see Mrs. Tosu on CCTV meeting with her husband, Tetsuo, at Reika's apartment. Once they exited their daughter's apartment, the two headed in different directions, and this time Mr. Tosu seemed to be carrying that same gift bag. Later, Mrs. Tosu met with her daughter outside their local train station. Based on records provided by Miss Reika herself, Miss Reika originally intended to meet Mr. Majima. She had contacted him, and the two set up a time and place to meet. Their meeting was prevented by Mrs. Tosu. According to Miss Reika, her mother ran into her while she waited for Mr. Majima. Mrs. Tosu then became distraught at something Miss Reika said to her mother. Miss Reika felt bad, so she canceled her plans with Mr. Majima in order to help calm her mother down. She was apparently making a scene. Meanwhile, CCTV shows that Mr. Tosu took a cab to Mr. Majima's apartment. We also see Mr. Kyouichi exit his apartment complex at that time. Now it appears as if the two barely missed each other. I can't say for certain as to why Mr. Tosu was at Kyouichi Majima's apartment, but there are two obvious possibilities. One, he went to Kyouichi's apartment because Mr. Majima asked him to. Or two, he attempted to break into Mr. Majima's apartment, possibly to plant evidence to frame Mr. Majima for murder. Either way, there is no doubt that he was there because of his association with Mr. Majima. Upon inquiry, a neighbor of Kyouichi Majima reported seeing someone who looked like Mr. Tosu near Mr. Majima's apartment. The neighbor said that this unknown man was leaving the area and holding a medium-sized paper bag. Possibly the same bag Mrs. Tosu had in her possession earlier. The cab driver, who escorted Mr. Tosu to and from Mr. Majima's apartment, reported something that he considered to be strange. He stated that Mr. Tosu was in possession of 2 flashlights, both brand new, still in their packaging. The driver stated that he witnessed Mr. Tosu exchange one flashlight with the other and went on to repackage one of the flashlights. He didn't ask why his client did this, and assumed it was to return the cheaper flashlight as the more expensive version. According to our gang investigation unit, Mr. Majima requested an ALS flashlight in order to search for blood in Mr. Nobuto's quote-unquote side girl's apartment. This could have been the flashlight that Mr. Tosu was tinkering with. I don't think it's accidental that Mr. Tosu has a flashlight and Mr. Majima needed a flashlight. Perhaps Mr. Tosu replaced the ALS flashlight with a standard blacklight, making it impossible to detect blood. Either way, our gang investigation unit reported that Mr. Majima found no blood in Miss Reika's apartment. Now, was this because there was no blood, or because the tool he had was ineffectual at detecting blood? I can't say unless on-the-ground investigators are able to obtain a warrant to search Miss Reika's apartment. They have thus far been unsuccessful. We'll see what happens once this report becomes available. That same night, for some unknown reason, both Mr. Tosu and Mr. Majima returned to Mr. Majima's apartment. CCTV captured the two heading in that direction around 23:05. When asked, Mr. Tosu stated that Kyouichi Majima desired to own and operate his own family diner. As such, they returned to Mr. Majima's apartment so that Kyouichi could make the pair an omelet for dinner. Was this only a means of Mr. Tosu to gain access to Mr. Kyouichi's apartment? If so, why? Inspection of Mr. Kyouichi's apartment revealed that he had an anti-theft mechanism on his front door to prevent unlawful entry, but made no such precautions regarding his balcony door. Did Mr. Tosu use Kyouichi's enjoyment for cooking against him as a means of distraction so that Mr. Tosu could unlock the balcony door for later entry? Why did the pair go to the apartment in the first place? Was it really just to make omelets? Based on what our gang investigation unit has made available, Kyouichi Majima brought Tetsuo Tosu with him to report back to higher-ranking member Tada. There, Mr. Majima informed Tada that he had not found any evidence of Nobuto's disappearance. While the men met, an email was received by the gang from an anonymous source. Reportedly, the email chastised the gang, suggesting that the gang were incompetent and ignorant. The notice went on to claim that both Nobuto Matori and Kyouichi Majima orchestrated a robbery involving an armored vehicle. No doubt the same robbery mentioned earlier by Miss Hibiki. So pause here. Let me turn to you, Mr. Matori. You didn't know about this robbery, did you? After receiving this email, their supervisor, some guy named Kubo, was brought in to oversee a search of Mr. Majima's apartment for the alleged stolen money. Mr. Majima was found to be in possession of a large amount of cash, none of which matched the serial numbers of the stolen money. Based on reports from the gang investigation unit, those in attendance discovered a gift bag containing human skeletal remains. Inside the bag also contained some personal items of Nobuto Matori, like his cell phone. Upon this discovery, Mr. Majima proclaimed his innocence and accused both Tetsuo and Mr. Tada of having framed him for the murder of Nobuto Matori. He even suggested the two collaborated to bring him down. The gang investigation unit reported that Kubo decided to accept Mr. Majima as the guilty party and ordered him to be sent to the boss in a body bag. Apparently, this order was not fulfilled, as Mr. Majima apparently escaped, possibly using the same money they found in the safe as a decoy. The police were notified about the rain of cash coming from Mr. Majima's apartment complex, but no investigation followed as police noted that everyone fled the scene by the time they arrived. At this time, Kyouichi Majima's whereabouts are unknown. I believe that Mr. Kyouichi's claims were half true. I think Mr. Tosu was involved in framing him for the death of Mr. Nobuto, but I don't believe Mr. Tada played any part in this scheme. None of the evidence supports his involvement. I believe considering Mr. Tosu's possible involvement helps explain what was discovered by my office's viewing of surveillance footage. What they discovered involves, of all people, Miss Kasen Tosu. With the help of CCTV, we located Mrs. Tosu with a backpack on around midnight, walking towards the apartment complex where Mr. Majima resides. Security footage from the complex does show, though the lighting is low, what appears to be Mrs. Tosu gain entry to the complex. She made her way to the top of the multi-storied building. She was then seen, with the help of a rope ladder, crawling out of a window in order to gain access to the rooftop. This is the last we see of Kasen Tosu for about 45 minutes. Yoshitatsu Matori. This is very odd behavior, especially for a self-proclaimed housewife. Would you be interested in hearing what I think happened? Okay, here's what I think. I think Mrs. Tosu used that rope ladder to gain access to your minor associate's apartment. Once there, I believe she somehow accessed the safe where the cash and remains were discovered. She put into that safe the remains of someone, most likely your son, as well as Nobuto's phone and the tablet containing the original video file of that faked video. The next time we see Mrs. Tosu is when she stepped into the stairwell on the 9th floor, the same floor Mr. Majima's apartment is located. I don't think this is a quinky-dink. She went down the stairwell and made her way out of the building. CCTV was unable to track her movements for the rest of the night. Mr. Matori, if this isn't what happened, then I have no possible way. Pause here while I deal with the morgue family dog. Mr. Matori, you gonna be okay? Okay, don't move. I'll know when I come back if you moved. Mr. Matori, if this isn't what happened, I have no possible way to explain Mrs. Tosu's presence at Kyouichi Majima's apartment. While the gang seemingly allowed Tetsuo Tosu to leave the apartment complex, CCTV did not allow his departure to go unseen. CCTV spotted him from that location all the way back to his daughter's apartment complex. This day happens to also be the last day we see Yoshitatsu Matori alive. Mr. Matori, what do you think of my thoughts so far? Am I on the right track here? I don't know what brought you to Miss Reika's apartment, but I believe you showed up to her apartment while Mr. Tosu happened to be there. I believe a fight ensued, and the noises from that scuffle prompted neighbors to contact the authorities. I believe the two responding officers heard the voice of Tetsuo Tosu. It is my belief that it was Mr. Tosu who lied to the police about the loose hamster. He did claim that he was looking for his daughter's hamster. Presumably this man who responded to the officers had a daughter, as does the father of the owner of the apartment unit, Miss Reika. From Miss Reika's statement, we do know she never had a pet hamster. Mr. Yoshitatsu, when the police arrived, why didn't you call out to them? Perhaps it's because you just weren't on good terms with authorities. Perhaps you were already dead, and I think I just answered my own question. Or perhaps these clear signs of suffocation I found suggest that you were being prevented from alerting anyone, as you slowly died from the wound at your midsection. Your nose is broken. From the skin that's left, there is bruising in every place imaginable. You fought very hard against your attacker. Now, even if we are unable to bring your killer to justice, I hope you're able to rest in peace with the understanding that someone, perhaps, knows a little about what happened to you. Now, this case has me feeling of two minds. I like it for the themes and messages you can walk away with, but dislike it for its failure to live up to my expectations regarding the likability and relatability of the so-called protagonist. Regarding the case itself, I was capable of painting a picture of what happened with a lot of missing information. Information an outside investigator would likely be unable to acquire. You'll have to watch the anime to uncover what I left out of the recap. But I think one could be able to piece together a story based on the discovery of Yoshitatsu Motori's body. A story that would eventually lead to Tetsuo Tosu being involved in some capacity. After all, there were a lot of witnesses. I wasn't just inventing them being present the whole time. Mind you, the discovery of Yoshitatsu Motori did not occur in the anime yet. But there was heavy foreshadowing that this could happen in the future. Where the anime fell short for me was the protagonist's comprehension about the gravity of having taken someone's life. I mean, we see glimpses of this, but it was more of a revelation where Tetsuo realized that the man he killed was also a human being. A revelation without remorse. The anime focused heavily on the external conflict between Tetsuo and the gang, but I expected there to be conflict within Tetsuo himself. Without this inner conflict, he just seemed too comfortable with killing another person, especially since I got the impression that Tetsuo is a person who has probably never shoplifted, let alone taken someone's life. If I saw more of that internal strife, I would have been able to view him as a real human being with complex motivations and complex emotions. And I could find myself rooting for him, wanting him to succeed. Instead, I got an automaton who showed little to no compassion towards others. So little compassion did Tetsuo have. He was willing to have someone killed just to cover up his own misdeeds, and as an aside here, it's the same person that he happened to save the life of earlier, which makes no flippin' sense to me. His attempted cover-up wasn't even effective, despite the gang being shockingly incompetent in oh so many ways. I'll list that now on the screen for you. Not to mention that Tetsuo's wife, Kasen, was incredibly comfortable with being an accessory to murder. I would have liked to know if she was wrestling with the fact that her spouse, someone she loved so deeply, murdered someone. She saw the dead body and immediately turned to Tetsuo and asked him how she could help him cover up this crime. I would have liked to know how this would impact a marriage. Lesser things have certainly torn marriages apart. So I was extremely disappointed with this anime because, in my view, it didn't live up to its potential, as it failed to display a level of humanity I believe is required in this type of story if there's clear intent for there to be a protagonist. However, maybe the story didn't believe it needed that aspect for what it did offer. The anime wanted to showcase the lengths one is willing to go for those that mean everything to them. In this case, it was family. The things people are willing to do, the pain people are willing to endure, the pain and fear of loss. It's all showcased in my home hero. The two fathers' purpose was living for their families. One father always knew this, while the other only reached that conclusion in the very end. It's a takeaway that can lead one to ponder a very real and applicable question this anime leaves us with. If this was your family, what would you do? Alright, Mr. Yoshitatsu. I think I'm finished here. Thank you so much for your time. You did very good. Okay, let's cover you back up. I'm sending this report to assisting media examiners for further review. Additional comments are to be logged and filled in the blank spaces below this report. Any other media examiner who comes across another troubling case and would like to put my investigatory prowess to use may contact my office using the same blank form provided under this report. Autopsy and investigation complete.